Okay, welcome to the segment on SellerMetrics. So on this particular episode, joining me today is Fredrik Gronkvist, the co-founder of ComplianceGate.com, which is based in Hong Kong, as well as SellerMetrics. ComplianceGate helps companies, including Amazon sellers, identify relevant requirements, including safety standards, certificates, labeling, lab testing requirements, with the overall goal to help Amazon sellers sell safe products that are not subject to recalls and potential sales ban. Fred, thank you for coming on. Hope you had a good New Year's.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a new year. I keep I tend to date documents, right? And I still live in 2021. I have to correct myself multiple times every day.
Yeah. Do you go with kind of this reporting time lag? So that's why all your documents are still last year.
No, it's just mentally. I tend to live in the previous year at least until Q2.
Okay, yeah, I know the feeling. It's kind of like you still have work from last year to catch up on.
Exactly.
Anyways, we're here today to talk about specifically on Amazon product compliance. I think it's one of those subjects that when it happens, you just you just want to really spend a lot of time on it. But when it doesn't happen, it's not one of those things that it's in front of Amazon sellers' minds. So before we get started, and get deeper and more specific, what is product compliance exactly?
Well, it's two dimensions to it, and one is that of product safety, and then you go into the the technicalities of ensuring that a product is safe. That can mean different things. You take something like this watch, like a client brand actually, and it's not going to explode. It's not going to fall over. It's not going to strangle you. But it could contain heavy metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, and so on. Okay, so that's the fundamental part, safety, which also includes substances. And the second part of compliance is also that of, say, labeling and certification, which is sort of communicating that your product is compliant. So these are the two sides to take into consideration. You could be selling a perfectly safe product, but okay, you fail to ensure that it has a CE mark for the EU or a country of origin label in the US. Well, okay, it's still not compliant. You could, vice versa, you could label a product correctly, but if it does contain certain substances, you're selling an electronic product, it's not designed correctly, unsafe lithium battery, or the wiring is not right, then
and this applies for not only e-commerce sellers like Amazon seller, but across just any retailers. Am I correct?
Well, this applies to any importer or manufacturer that basically it comes down to whether you're introducing a product or not. So the main responsibility would be, okay, you're based in the US and you import products, say from China, and you sell in the US, then you're introducing that product, and that would, I'm simplifying now, but make you responsible. Or if you're a domestic manufacturer in the United States, you also have a similar responsibility. It is different if you're domestic, like a trader, or if you're distributing products. That would be a different scenario. But most Amazon sellers that we are working with, they are importing products, or they have their own production facilities overseas, which still makes them importers in that case.
Okay. And to the point of Amazon seller, so I personally probably is a bit guilty of this when I was an Amazon seller. So I think product compliance is something that was kind of a little far from my mind when I was selling on Amazon. Why do you think Amazon seller often neglect this part of Amazon selling?
Well, if you look at manufacturing today and getting involved with e-commerce, it's also accessible. You can find suppliers pretty much anywhere in the world online. At the same time, you go back to when, the 70s, you didn't have anything like Amazon. You can go back to the 90s, right? There was no Amazon as individual entrepreneurs, we didn't have access to these marketplaces like Amazon, right? Bigger businesses don't really struggle with compliance. It's a non-issue. They have compliance managers, they have engineers that can manage this and gradually implement new standards and labeling and so on into the product line. Now, imagine that you started selling on Amazon in 2017. You're not an engineer. You haven't really worked with compliance. Then why would you know about these requirements? But the thing is, at the end of the day, you're still facing the very same requirements as all other businesses.
Right.
So I think that's the reason.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely, like when I was selling on Amazon, when I first sourced the product, I definitely did not know all the different compliance, and I didn't get all those information until Amazon asked for them specifically for like CE certification, stuff like that, testing certification. So I didn't even know about this until like Amazon, like actually messaged me like, I need this compliance like information. So yeah, I think I understand like your point, how like it's really hard for like the new sellers to be engrossed in this particular subject when they don't really have that much experience in terms of going through all that process before. And so my next question is like, why does so I think Amazon has been requesting more compliance documents as of late from Amazon sellers, and why do you think there has this increase in terms of asking Amazon sellers for documentation?
Well, I haven't really been that much up to date, but I know there's been some cases in, at least in the US, where Amazon has been trying to shift some of this responsibility to individual sellers, which I think they have a point. I don't really understand how Amazon could take responsibility at the same time having this open marketplace that is absolutely vital for a lot of businesses, right? Well, an interesting side of this is that if you look at the customs authorities and market surveillance authorities, they are much less effective at enforcing this, okay? At verifying if products are compliant, meaning that they are correctly labeled, they're certified, and they are safe, meaning that you have some sort of test report or documentation to support this, right? Amazon started by making it mandatory in certain categories, and what I was observing back then was that Amazon was making these compliance requests that you are referring to, and back then this was more of on a case-by-case basis, working with a customer in Israel, and it actually came to our former office here in Hong Kong, and he showed me these compliance requests. It was a few years ago, and explained that, okay, we're selling this, we have this product line that we've been selling for a few years, right? Some sort of children's product. I can't remember exactly what it was. And Amazon then requested compliance documentation according to a US regulation, CPSIA, so test report, CPC, and labeling photocopies, okay? These three things for one or two of the SKUs. So at that time, at least, Amazon hadn't really standardized the submission procedure. We're looking at the current situation. My understanding is, as I'm not an Amazon seller, we are not selling on Amazon. I want to clarify that. But we're working with many of these companies, right? And that Amazon is standardizing the product listing procedure in a different way, whereas this is actually triggered when you're listing a product. So that is what I'm observing.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense. I guess like Amazon Marketplace always evolving. So with like terms of service, for example, terms of service always being up to date. For example, recently with the rebates change, and I guess like compliance also one of those things that's continually evolving. So like the marketplace evolving, basically the idea is that you have to evolve with the marketplace as well. So what you did previously might not work the same way as you sell before. Like when I was selling in like 5 years ago, it's definitely different atmosphere than it is right now in terms of compliance, competition, etc. And okay, to the question, I think you're talking about categories before, right? And what do you, okay, so I feel when I was selling different marketplace, the requirements and standards different between categories and marketplaces. In your view, what have you seen, like in your business, what have you seen, which marketplace and also which categories get hit the most in terms of compliance requests?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, as I mentioned early on, well, it's not that early. We're talking about like a few years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, when we started to work more hands-on with these product safety aspects, right? And it started with sellers that selling in the United States, not necessarily based in the US, but selling in the United States, FBA or cross-border or whatever, right? But only children's product back then, as far as I can remember, and that's defined in the US as anything, not just toys, but that could be, well, baby carrier. Give you an idea, okay? A feeding bottle, right? So anything that's for children 12 years of age or younger, okay, needs to be compliant with CPSIA. And Amazon started to crack down on sellers, meaning that they were making these compliance requests, giving them like 30 days to submit these documents basically to prove compliance. And I said, Amazon has been far more effective at this compared to, say, the customs authorities, be that in the United States, the EU, or anywhere for that matter. So I think that's why Amazon is, sort of getting this reputation. It's just that, the customs just wave it through. They don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
But back to the topic. Since then, we've seen this expand primarily to electronics. So you can find information about this in Amazon Seller Central. One thing that is important to mention about electronics in the US is that, generally speaking, Amazon is requiring you to comply with the regulations that apply to that product in the marketplace in the country. Okay, so I'm selling watches. Just to give you an idea, in the US, I need to comply with regulations that apply to watches. In the United States, in the EU, then you need to comply with regulations for that product in the European Union, right? And now the UK after Brexit, that's a completely different story. Okay, that was diverging now, right? But if we're looking at categories that they have been sort of targeting, seeing everything from, as I said, electronics. They want to see UL compliance in the US and compliance with EN standards in the EU. Jewelry, that was actually quite surprising. One of our customers got hit by, I think that was Amazon Germany, and they wanted to see REACH compliance test reports. That was quite interesting, because REACH restricts chemicals in all consumer products sold in the European Union. Okay, and this started about a year ago, I think early 2021, where they actually go out and ask for a REACH test report. And I know a lot of companies don't have like chemical test reports and heavy metal test reports for everything they're selling, because that would be quite expensive. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. But what we're seeing is that they're not limiting to a certain age group. They're not limiting to a certain product category. So ultimately, it really comes down to that you need to comply with the testing, safety, labeling, certification requirements apply to that product in the marketplace where you sell.
Okay, that's interesting. So I guess it's kind of all over the place, but you've seen a lot in the US particularly. I think it makes sense because it is like the biggest marketplace in terms of Amazon, and you have seen a lot of PR, like in the news, about like some products that somebody bought on Amazon didn't go too well in the States. So I think in terms of public pressure, they are ramping it up on Amazon, and in turn, Amazon is also being more a little stingent on actually what on the marketplace, and that would have an effect on the sellers as well.
Something I would like to mention is a major reason for sellers being, let's say, rejected on Amazon in the last year, and it doesn't relate to any given product category, but it is the issue of cross-border sellers selling into the EU primarily, and they don't have they use a non-EU address. Okay, and Amazon has been rejecting many of these sellers in 2021. Many that are based here in Hong Kong or Shenzhen also, of course. And we received so many reports from customers and non-customers, and we eventually managed. We did research, and our finding is that there is this regulation called the General Product Safety Directive, which actually states that it defines importers and manufacturers and so on. And Amazon, they just decided, and my understanding is that they gradually started to enforce this as a new regulation came into force in July last year in the EU concerning cross-border trade. So that's another thing to take into consideration. You need to be very careful when it comes to ensuring that your product packaging is correctly labeled, and something like using a Shenzhen company address could be an issue if you sell in the EU. For example, right. I'm not sure if we saw any comparable case for the United States. I think there was one or two, but I've been looking at so many of these cases. I can't recall the details.
I didn't really find like a specific pattern to all this, I guess. And I guess like that's also moved into my next point. So I think you talk about labeling. So I guess let's get into like more of the details of certification. So from my understanding from you is that there are different types of document requests, right? So on a high level, what are these like documentation requests? Like what are the different branches that they could potentially fall under? I think there's you can add to it or correct me if we're wrong. I believe there's like the labeling, there is the test reports, and there is the certificates.
Yeah, you can. Yes, we could simplify it like that. And I think it's good for everyone watching this to we try to to keep this focused. So you could say that yes, it's safety, which is verified through lab testing, and I also include chemical content in that definition, certification, and labeling. Yes.
All right. So just to based on my personal experience, I saw electronics, and when I got hit by certification and lab testings, I was lucky because my supplier had the documentation. So a lot of times, not all suppliers had it. So I was selling electronics; they have like the UL testing certification ready for me, and I sent it to Amazon, and everything was okay. So I think nowadays sellers need to be a little bit proactive before they source the item. I think they would have to maybe talk to suppliers whether they have this particular certification for their product category. I think that would definitely manage your risk definitely for the future. And to add to that, so Fredrik, like with the suppliers, a lot of times have this like documentation ready for you, before you sell their product on Amazon.
In your case, you were really lucky. You definitely, maybe it's not luck. Clearly, you've done a very good job at sourcing a supplier, identifying a supplier. But yeah, given the fact that you lived in this part of the world for a while and working hands-on with manufacturers, maybe in Shenzhen, I would imagine, back then you crossed the border and so on. So definitely, when you work with this very rare breed of very organized suppliers that maybe you enlisted and so on, then you can be lucky, and if we can use that term, and you may be in a situation where they can submit these documents to you. But that only works in a circumstance where number one, they have these test reports, which that's a massive gamble. I would say, if you go to a random supplier online without mentioning supply directories, it's less than say 1 in 100 that they will have these documents, and that's assuming for your products to begin with. And two, that only works if you're selling private label products. When it comes to compliance, you don't certify an entire production facility. Well, there are aspects of that, but that's a different thing. When it comes, we talk about product compliance and test reports, it applies to one specific SKU, that design, those colors, those materials and components. So what this means is, now if you launch anything that's custom designed, right? So you bring in this watch to market, or you developed a new wooden educational toy, whatever. Like this, there cannot be any test reports in the past that exist for your product that was made at a late time, at a later time, right? That's impossible. That would be a wormhole. You go back in time. There is no test report because your product did not exist at that point in time. So you cannot obtain a test report for a product that didn't exist. And this is important to understand, because this applies to also, let's say you develop a new electronic product. Okay, now you go and you change one component. It's a different system. And you can't say that it applies. So retroactively using pre-existing test reports is something I that is very often, but at best is very risky. At worst, it's not even possible. Okay, so to rely on a supplier to come and submit these documents is that's not a strategy. That is extremely dangerous. And it's also important to mention that manufacturers in China, manufacturers elsewhere, actually we're working now with European manufacturers because of the shipping costs for some of our textiles customers, right? Because we also work manufacturing other than compliance. And I can say that they are not even, European manufacturers are not necessarily experts in EU textiles labeling requirements, okay? And people still have this, they still expect Chinese suppliers to know anything about product compliance requirements in the US and the EU. They don't. Okay, at best they may know that you need a country of origin labeling for the US, but that's about as far as it goes. It's not their job.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's a mixed case. I think it depends on the size of the suppliers and what their breadth of experience is. So I think I was lucky. I think the supplier that I work with is a pretty sizable factory, and they work with like European clients, US clients recently, so B2B. So they definitely work with sellers that are like much larger than me. So they kind of have experience dealing with that. So they were having all their documents like ready for me like to send to Amazon. So definitely lucky. So yeah, I think what would definitely help for any seller is just ask beforehand, right? Know beforehand, do a bit of research, right? And I think on compliancegate.com, there's definitely some resources for you to like go over. Maybe what I can do is just link some documents below on the description from Fred's team, and maybe you could the viewers can go over it at their own time. So I think we talked about like submitting, and then we'll submit the documents to Amazon. So I think you've also been involved with that for your client. And in terms of actually submitting the documents, how do you think a seller can submit their documents in a way that can improve their chances of getting their product approved on the marketplace?
Well, it's just what you said, really. It's about knowing the requirements beforehand and not being just reactionary, but you plan to launch a product, you need to understand the requirements that apply. What sort of testing do I need? What labeling do I need? What certification do I need? The way this works in practice is pretty straightforward. You would do research. You can find this information for free. Well, on our website, but also on government website. This is all public information, right? Like the European Union website. Of course, it takes time to navigate it, but it's all there. And then in the US, there's the FTC.gov. Consumer Product Safety Commission website is really good, actually. You can find samples and so on for certificates. So that's where you start, and you simply have to research requirements applied to your product. Then in the US, you have to go deeper. You also need to look at the state the states that you may be selling in or selling to. California Proposition 65 is one thing to consider, and unless you want to lose that market, then you got another level of compliance requirement to deal with there, right? But number one is to research a requirement. Now, step two, let's say that I'm planning to bring a new product to market, and it's a children's product in the US, just to give you an idea, I would need to get it lab tested. And I can either get it tested pre-production to verify certain safety aspects like sharp points or small parts, stuff like that. I would need to get it lab tested again because it applies only to the batch, right? The batch of products, the production run that you would place on the market, that's what you need to get tested, okay? Not a prototype that looks the same, but using different materials and so on. So now I got testing done. Now, based on this, I can self-issue my children's product certificate. As a CPC, I can find a template on our website. I can find a template on the cpsc.gov website, just to give you an idea, okay? Then I need to create my label files. Well, actually, I was wrong there. I should have created my label files before production started.
Right. Yeah.
Because I need to send those labels to my factory so that they print the labels, meaning if I make it in Vietnam, made in Vietnam, and I need to have a tracking label, okay? And this information you can also find online, traceability code, stuff like that. So it needs to be printed on the product, okay? And as said, you also need information about the SKU, the model number, your company information, the importer manufacturer details, stuff like that, even contact details on the packaging, okay? You need to send the files to the supplier, then lab testing, then you issue the certificate. Now you have what you need pretty much. You can arrange photocopies of product label. You have created your certificate, which is basically a PDF file. There's no approval. It's not like you need that stamped from the European Parliament or anything, or the Senate in the US. It doesn't work like that. It's self-issued based on a test report. You still need it though. And this means that now I have my lab test report, which is also just a PDF file. This stuff is managed online these days. Everything is, just sitting at your laptop like this. That's how you manage compliance these days. You just send the files to the supplier, you get a test report in your email inbox, and then you create your own CPC. Now you have these three things. You have the test report, PDF, the certificate PDF, and photocopies of the finished product with the label. Listing the product, which I understand you need to do before the shipment, correct me if I'm wrong. And then I would likely trigger a compliance request, a document request right away, and will just upload my PDFs and maybe my JPEGs. This is what it means in reality.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's somewhat basically project management. You gotta basically plan ahead. For example, you mentioned like the labeling, you need to get that up ahead of time, right, to the suppliers to print it out and put on your packaging and your product. So I think you should, for Amazon seller nowadays, like they have to do a lot of work and research beforehand. There's just no easy way around it with the stricter restrictions on compliance requirements nowadays. So I think in terms of wrapping up everything, is there any just high level advice for any Amazon sellers out there trying to negotiate the compliance situation?
Well, I would actually like to go back one step. You mentioned when we discussed this, the way compliance can work with suppliers and so on. It's really complex. I used to live in Shanghai for several years, and my background it's not really product compliance. I'm not a lawyer. My background is in manufacturing and quality assurance. So there's one very telling example that will really help you understand what you're dealing with when it comes to compliance and offshore, outsourced manufacturing. So working with this retailer, Swedish company actually, and they wanted to buy these bean bags, these bean bags, right? And we found what I think is the leading supplier of China, if not the world, based in Hangzhou, in Zhejiang province. And, so I went there, we negotiated a contract with them, got samples made, entered mass production. And part of this was what we call a supply screening or compliance check. So we did an assessment on their ability to manufacture compliant products. We knew we couldn't apply existing test reports to future production runs, as I just explained, but we do ask them for existing test reports. This concerned flammability of the material, and also chemicals and heavy metals, as I just mentioned, automation, color, fabric, these two things. They had it all, like they sent, you name it, you send it to us. This is clear because they have been working with so many major Western and Japanese brands, and it's just part of what they do. It's not really they had the documents. It was clear these guys, they know how to procure materials that are compliant. It's not a challenge for them. It's, yeah, whatever, let us know. So informed the customer. They eventually placed an order without our involvement. And then I was called back to the factory by the customer to do quality check and also collect samples to basically cut out some fabric and take it back to a lab in Shanghai. And as they picked me up in the train station, I just asked them, okay, so I think this customer has some requirements about this or that standard, right? Flammability. You make this? Did you make this product compliant? Is it designed to be compliant? Did you use those materials? No, it's not in the contract. Oh shit. Yeah, good point. Right. Yeah, they didn't mention that. So the customer, they had this rather one-dimensional view in which there are only two types of animals in the manufacturing world, the compliant and the non-compliant. It is not like that. They had the capability. They're looking at the specification. They're looking at the technical documentation. They are looking at your order terms if you have such a document, and they will make what you request. And in this case, the customer made an assumption the products were not made to be compliant. They actually passed the test anyway, because their flammability is not that difficult to pass. You would sort of have to soak in gasoline or something to fail. But the point is, it was a risk, and the customer put themselves at a risk because they made this assumption. And if you look at the way, say, big brands like Apple, the way they're working, it's not like they give a list of standards to Foxconn. It's like, hey, can you work it out? We think there's something called REACH or UL in the US. Give them, the schematics, the PCB drawings, all of it. The casing CAD files. It's designed to be compliant. They don't even need to know what they are assembling. Like they can do blind. It's built into the product.
Yeah, I think definitely for any So I think the moral of that story that you just told was that don't leave it to chance. I think your client definitely dodge a bullet there. Just because they dodge a bullet doesn't mean that you would potentially dodge a bullet.
Certainly, and you take something like electronics. Okay, when it comes to chemicals and so on, it is actually quite common that you go to an average textile manufacturer in Guangzhou or wherever, they don't know what REACH or California Prop 65 even is, but many of those chemicals are already phased out. You don't use many of those banned chemicals anymore, so they've been phased out since like the 80s or something. So that's what, is one of our terms, accidental compliance. Does not exist when it comes to electronics. Doesn't exist when it comes to electronics. That's a completely different situation. So it is important to not just look at this as something like, you need to get a rubber stamp, you need to tick the boxes. In some cases, you need to understand what this means, technically speaking. Okay, so here we have this manufacturing engineering focus because that's where you start with everything. Getting the labeling right, that's the easy part. So I think it's important to understand the fundamentals here.
Okay. Yeah, Fred, thanks for sharing all that. This subject could be very technical. I can go on hours potentially, right? But again, to the viewers, I will link some articles down below on the description. And if you need some more additional information or potentially need some professional help in terms of compliance, you could reach out to Fred at compliancegate.com. And Fred is also nice enough to provide a discount code for the viewers looking to use their service. So that would be SellerMetrics 20, 20% off. And I will also link that in the description below. And also, I'm going to link the knowledge guide on compliancegate.com. That would be compliancegate.com /guide. So Fred, thank you again for appearing on my segment. And I hope for any Amazon sellers out there, they won't get hit by any compliance by following a lot of the tips that Fred described in this segment. So Fred, thank you for coming on. See you on the other side.
Thank you for inviting me.